you. Good morning. This is a joint hearing of House Education and House Ways and Means. We are getting an update on the work on the Commission on the Future of Public Education in Vermont. A little bit of history here. The commission was formed as part of the yield bill last year. As it became clear through all the predicted property tax increases that it was probably an opportunity for folks from all over the education world to come together and really talk about, okay, Vermonters are saying this is not sustainable, and how do we re-envision it? How do we plan for a future that can be more sustainable, that can finally address a lot of the sort of pressures that have been coming in from the mental health needs of our students, to declining enrollment, to buildings that are not in the condition that we'd like them to be in. And so
governance structures.
And our governance structures. So really kind of moving along our continued evolution in Vermont of how we do things. So it was formed and created as part of the yield bill, and it was just there's a lot of interesting timing things going on. We did not yet have our current Secretary of Education sort of fully on board and with a plan of her own to move forward with, to learn about Vermont and come up with a vision as well. So there's been some sort of dual listening going on. And now we find ourselves at a time when the governor will be unveiling his plan for the future in a week or so, and the commission continues its work, which is also part of a great discussion. So anyway, we'll go right ahead. We have the chair with us of the commission, who has been doing phenomenal work for us, and I would say probably not being appropriately compensated for it, but certainly been putting everything she's got into it. Anyway, Megan, if you would just introduce yourself and begin with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Roy. As you said, I am the chair of the Commission on Public Education in Vermont. I teach at St. Michael's College. I teach in the school leadership program. I'm a former superintendent and special ed administrator. And I guess in response to that piece, this is really difficult work, but it's really important work. And so I was glad to be part of the commission and doing my best to be the chair. So here is what I hope that we will do today. First, I'll just give an overview of the commission itself, who's on it, what's our charge, how we organize our work, because I think that's pretty relevant. These are all parts of the preliminary findings report, which I'm sure you all have, or at least have access to. And then I will review the preliminary findings and specifically the recommendations at this point. The commission has dual responsibility to give reports. This is only a preliminary report. I'll talk about that, and then should have plenty of time for questions. So stop me if there's a question that feels more immediate. But obviously the commission was convened as part of Act 183, and the charge is pretty lofty, to study the provision of education and make recommendations for a statewide vision for our education system, to ensure that all students are afforded substantially equal educational opportunities in an efficient, sustainable, and stable system. And I think it's important to say the charge because it is so significant. Here is the membership of the commission. Most members are either designees of bodies. I am technically on this group as part of my previous role as chair of the Census-Based Funding Advisory Group, which was created under Act 173. I'll give you a second to read through, but there's 13 members, and we are, I believe, with good intention, this is meant to represent various perspectives in education. It doesn't represent everyone in education, nor does it represent everyone in Vermont, and that is one of the things that we have tried to prioritize as a commission, is how do we bring additional voices into the conversation, so I will talk about that. Here are our deliverables or our responsibilities. We convened for the first time only 6 months ago, a little over 6 months ago, on July 15th. We needed to develop a work plan and a communication plan by September 15th. I would say both of those are iterative, and in fact, the work of the commission right now is to adjust those work plans and sort of figure out the best way to be effective given the current context. As I shared, we needed to provide a written preliminary report, which is what you have, by December 15th. I do believe it came out on December 20th. That was incredibly difficult, I would just say, as an aside. We'll talk a little bit about the timeline and the constraints that we put on our work. We are required to provide a final report in December of 2025. That should include proposed legislative language, or as it currently stands, we are asked to provide proposed legislative language also in December. There will need to be a more formal public comment period beginning in October of 2025 in preparation for the final report. And so there's both a desire to be really deeply engaged in the community on the part of the commission, and we are required to do that more formally. And the committee will sunset, the commission will sunset on December 31st of this year. So in the legislation itself, there is quite a lengthy list of policy consideration areas. And so the commission pretty early on needed to organize its work to have a chance of being able to understand these. And part of our findings is that these things are, these three areas, finance system, governance, resources and administration, and the physical size and the footprint. We refer to that a lot as the delivery model. That the policy recommendation areas fit under one of those three categories, and also they intersect. One of the biggest findings is that the complexity of the issue, when you make changes in any one of those areas, they impact the others. And it makes it difficult to only make changes in one of those areas. In the way that we began our work, we also recognized that in order to have some kind of principle or set of principles in order to make decisions about or against, we needed to ground ourselves and say, if we are considering a recommendation, does it align with X? And so the commission developed a set of guiding principles. The first one is less so a principle so much as an acknowledgement. In Vermont, it is the state's responsibility to provide public education, and the state has authority over public education. The state chooses to delegate that because of its tradition of local decision making, and there's tension between those two things. So the commission wants to elevate that as an acknowledgement. It's part of what makes the work challenging. The other three are more guiding principles. These are the things to say, if we are considering making a recommendation, we want to make sure it is equitable. So we're committed to decision making that centers equity for Vermont students. We don't attempt to define equity, but we do have these core understandings that it does not always mean equal, that solutions with an equity focus are differentiated by need, and that when we think about equity, we need to think both about inputs, so what do students have access to, but also their outcomes. We have a guiding principle of quality to make sure that publicly funded Vermont students are all afforded high quality educational opportunities that are equitable, inclusive, anti-racist, culturally responsive, and anti-discriminatory. That is all in state board rule. We didn't make up that sentence. But we are committed to quality. Any decision that we make needs to elevate or continue quality. And it needs to be sustainable and affordable. As Representative Conlon said, that's sort of why we're here. That's the end reason why we're here, the prompt. So that is how the commission has committed to making decisions. At the moment, we have 3 subcommittees, 2 of which are defined in the law. I'll talk later at the end, I'll talk about sort of where we are at the moment. The commission has decided to do most of its work in the immediate next few months as a full commission because of just sort of where we are in the context. But the law defines a steering group, 2 members of that group appointed by the administration, 2 members appointed by the Senate, and 2 members appointed by the House. I'm on that just to organize the 2, but the steering group is meant to devise the work plan and sort of keep the commission moving. The steering group also names the Education Finance Subcommittee. That's stated in the law that committee exists. It is the only committee that can have non-commission members, and Representative Kornheiser is our non-commission appointee and the chair of that committee. Those are the members. The committee exists, all of these committees still exist. We have decided in the short term to work as a full commission and not as separate committees. I'll talk about that in a second. We also created, as a commission, we created a communication and engagement subcommittee, and that is because there is a need to deeply engage and represent all of Vermont, and even though with all good intentions, those 13 people are there trying to do good work, we can't possibly represent all of Vermont in a way that is accessible. So, and we don't have that expertise. And so we have a subcommittee and have just brought on a consulting firm, the agency, I believe signed that contract this week. So we will be working with a communication and engagement firm in whatever we decide to do, whether we are generating recommendations or responding and reacting to recommendations, they will help us design that. So right now those function as subcommittees. Specific to communication and engagement, this is what we're trying to do. We need to educate the public about the context. Why is this so complex? We need to provide data so that when folks give input, they are able to do that in an informed way. We really spend most of our time listening and learning. We have held public sessions as part of our rotation of meetings. And we want some additional expertise to be able to help us design those in a way that more people can participate. And that engagement is really about influence. It's not just about being able to share perspective, it's also being able to allow that perspective to impact decision making. So this is how the commission has thought about communication and engagement. And I think you're going to hear me say repeatedly, and I'm sure folks will have questions about it, but the Agency of Education, as any agency would with a new leader, is also engaged in listening, gathering data, creating a strategic plan, and we have as a commission faced questions and actually confusion about which is which. This is separate work. Obviously, we benefit from information gathered, as I hope they would benefit from the existence of the commission. But it is challenging, and it's part of what makes the work a little bit confusing, I think, to the public. Okay. Preliminary findings. So a lot has sort of been said around the commission was charged in its short-term report to give preliminary findings and short-term cost containment recommendations. And I think a lot of, certainly I, as the chair, heard lots of, but you didn't produce short-term cost containment recommendations. And I would just say that the findings that I'm going to review for the commission aren't just background information. We think they're actually critical for the legislature to understand. And it is correct that we did not have enough time to model out and come to recommendations for short-term cost containment. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but maybe that feels like a distinction without a difference, but it does feel important. We believe that the complexity, the things I'm about to talk about, are findings in and of themselves. So that's just kind of overviewing that. So Our context in Vermont, most of this isn't new to folks, but we have affordability challenges that are not unique to education, and education is impacted and it sort of exists in relation to those other issues, right? Rising costs of goods, labor and healthcare, housing shortage, enrollment decline, all of those things that others in Vermont are dealing with impact education. We believe strongly that cost and therefore tax impact is not just an issue of education spending. Education finance encompasses spending, and yes, it is part of our challenge is cost drivers, personnel, facilities, tuition, special education, and it involves how we generate revenue, it involves how we use the education fund, what we do with our dollars. And it's not just spending that makes this issue so complex. Our delivery models impact education quality and they impact spending and they're determined locally. So those are the other two, if you want to say legs of a stool or whatever metaphor, but that's why those three things go so closely together: governance, delivery model, and spending. Because how we choose to deliver education, which at this time is determined locally, impacts how we all pay for education because of our shared system. One of our most critical findings is just that, that education finance needs to understand itself in the context of the intersection of all of these areas. This is sort of a repeat of what I've shared, but the example of this is when a local district makes its decisions about how many schools to operate, if they don't operate schools, what their tuition program will look like. They make that decision locally, and then the costs for that decision are shared across the state, and they're impacted by other elements of governance like accountability and the role of the state board and the agency of education in creating unity, right? So it's all of those things together make it really complicated. Just changing how much school districts are asked to spend without also changing who defines what quality and what delivery looks like and who makes those decisions still will result in different education and perhaps inequitable education around the state. We have a finding of sort of really exuding that this is a shared responsibility, a collective responsibility. We all are responsible, the state is responsible for the education of our youth, and delivering on this really is going to require collaboration and broad transformational change. And it's going to require, the commission believes that it's going to require change in areas that are really painful and hard. The visual is just simply to say it's not one thing. Again, it feels like we're belaboring a point, but it's a point the commission feels is important to belabor. And I would also just add, anyone who's in Vermont right now, reading the media, listening, talking to folks, will hear, well, if you just spent less, or if you just changed who makes decisions, don't worry about how much we spend, just change how we deliver it. Any one of those things by themselves is not going to change this complex challenge. Okay, so preliminary data findings and policy exploration. What I will try to do is sort of explain how the commission has approached its work. And by the way, as an aside, I am happy to be interrupted by members of the commission who want to add anything to this. Because I think it is just helpful for the legislature to understand the way the commission has tried to thoughtfully address policy considerations. We are committed to use clear, valid, and accurate data. Much has been said about the data that has been produced so far. This is one of those places where the intersection or the parallel processes between the Agency of Education and the Commission have gotten challenging. The agency in the law is asked to provide the Commission data, and so they have. And they have also made, the Commission and others have brought questions, concerns about that data. They have made attempts to update that data. And so there's overlap between those two things. When we look at any piece of data, regardless of where the origin is, we have to look at it with a critical eye, and we need to be careful not to eliminate data outright, but also to understand that there's limitations in every piece of data. However, there's still themes around the data that we have, even once it has been revised. We are in Vermont unique in how we organize and fund our education system. Our schools tend to be smaller and more highly staffed, resulting in higher costs. Enrollment has declined significantly, and the agency's report on the education finance system echoes those same findings. So I don't think this is new information to people. And any policy consideration will require analysis across a number of key factors. So I'll talk a little bit about how the commission approached policy exploration. I would say we were myopically focused on producing this December preliminary report and trying to deliver on short-term cost containment. That started with the Education Finance Subcommittee, who gathered essentially brainstorms. There is a link to a working document. It is very much a working document. It looks like a working document. Generating brainstorms from the commission, from public comment. We know it doesn't yet have every idea that's ever been posed to the commission. The commission wants to continue to make it a working document. But the way it approached its work is to generate brainstorms and then say, what do we need to know about each one of those things in order to make any sort of recommendation around it, whether it's short-term or long-term. That's one of the things that the Finance Committee asked. Is this going to be something that can be enacted quickly? If so, when would any cost containment be provided? Is it aligned with the guiding principles of the commission? What's the overall policy goal? So there are a lot of pieces that starting with the Finance Subcommittee identified, here's how we need to look at these issues. And frankly, that is where the work was in December, is in process. There are limitations to the time frame we were given for preliminary recommendations. And the commission actually spent quite a bit of time talking about what to share with you all in this report, and ultimately landed on, it's important for you to see the current status of all the things that have been brainstormed, knowing that not all of them are recommendations. In fact, some of the things in the working document kind of conflict with each other. And we know that, but ultimately, and there were differing opinions about this. There was concern that sharing the list of brainstorms would sound like recommendations, would feel or be perceived as, oh, well, here's the list. And it's not the list, and we tried to articulate that in the report. But ultimately, and frankly, we spent so much time talking about that the document is already a public document, already on the commission's website, and so it is linked in the report. But it is important to know those are not recommendations at this point. And I've sort of said this, the level of study and engagement that the Act asks us to do wasn't possible for this December 1 or December 15th timeline. We have another year, and we are trying to turn our attention and lean into that for the rest of our time together, but it was not possible. And the public school budget process is nearing completion. Most school districts right now their boards at least are adopting their final budgets. And that limits the ability to take action on short-term spending. I do think it's really important to know that that does not mean public schools have not been working on this. All of you live in a district and you probably are engaged with what those processes look like. The education organizations early on, the administration early on has been communicating with potential places that school districts could look at. So it is not to say that our report isn't coming out in a timely enough fashion to give advice, but that does not mean that the system isn't working on this. And we also just acknowledge that short-term cost containment is necessary but not sufficient. A lot of the things that we talked about or that the Finance Committee talked about is, well, this is a long-term strategy, but we have to put some things into motion early on. Or this could be a cost containment strategy and it would require a transition period. So that's sort of a little bit about our timeframe. Okay, so there is a lot in just the findings. So before I talk about the 2 recommendations the commission made, I would just reiterate, we think it's important that part about how complex it is, how intersecting those policy areas are, and how the solution doesn't lie in any one of them, we think that's really important. So I'll just elevate that again. There's 2 things that,
Can I actually pause after you?
yes, please.
I
Yes.
really want to emphasize again what Megan said. Like it seems in some ways very obvious that that was sort of the findings of the commission. It's actually a really big deal that they said that out loud and said it over and over and over again. Because in so much of the media coverage of this, so much of the political coverage of this, and so much of the conversations that we were even having last session, we were really looking at these as different pieces that could move separately. And that finding is really, I think, central to how we're all planning to do our work this year, and just want to sort of like continue to elevate the thing you've elevated 4 times.
And I would just add on to it, one of the limitations we had on the commission to make any recommendations was the inability to model, to have, the amount of data we would need to say, yes, this is a good idea, because we know the impact would be this. So it would be very hard to say this is a concrete recommendation when we were unable to say here's what all of the impacts of it are.
Yeah. And I would just extend an example a little bit more to the example of a local school district creating its budget. If a school district is simply asked to spend less money, and by the way, we are. I mean, school districts are. I apologize for saying we. I know I'm here as the chair, but I've spent most of my life in public schools, so. But public schools, if just told to spend less money, and the decision-making around how then to deliver education is determined locally, and there is not a really concrete and specific expectation around delivery, or at least there's no accountability around that, then they could make decisions about what to do with less money that are not good for kids. And I think that's the biggest thing. It isn't just that it's complicated and they intersect, although it's complicated and they intersect. It's that when we only look at a spending lever and we don't also look at who makes the decisions and what should education look like, we could be spending less money and not in service of better outcomes for kids. So I would just focus on the outcome piece, or what kids experience too. So this first recommendation to affirm the purpose of the commission, the commission was established with this broad charge to define the future of public education. We also know that there's a need for the General Assembly to initiate policy actions this year. We also know that there's a number of policy proposals that are going to be put in front of you shortly. Some of those are, by the way, are in the working document, and they're, at least the things that have been teased around the administration, they're ideas that are not new to Vermont, but we know there's a sense of urgency. We really think it's important to remain cohesive. If the commission is sort of on its own track and working in here, and the legislature has a different way they would like to engage in the work, it's important to just say that and either refine the charge of the commission or narrow it. We are really suited with an engagement consultant and with the membership of the commission itself to be able to analyze and react to things that everyone is considering, whether they come from the administration or whether they're generated here. We have the ability to do that if we're able to. But I would say that the legislature really needs to affirm and support the commission if we are to be useful in our work going forward. And we have turned our attention recently. We had a meeting on January 6th, and we had a steering group meeting this week. We're turning our attention to how can we be the most effective. We will also look at all of the policy recommendations ourselves as a commission, and, because it is a long list, even looking at a year to do it instead of 6 months, it is a very long list. So we will need to do our own priority. We will discuss how we think we can be most helpful, but the legislature really needs to affirm that. So that's one of our recommendations, is for the legislature to think about how best can the commission serve this work. And the second is really to continue to prioritize engagement. We know that we don't look and sound and experience, we meaning the commission, like every Vermonter. And all those different perspectives have to be brought to the table. And we have set ourselves up, we think, to be able to provide really helpful information. We know that the agency has also undertaken engagement activities, but our charge is separate from that. Our charge is to capture statewide perspectives related to the General Assembly's exploration of education policy, and we want to continue to do that, and we think it's really important to bring the voices of those not represented into that conversation. And I think that's what I have. I'm happy to take questions.
Great. Thank you. Yes, we'll go over here. Representative Maslin, then Representative Hickley.
Just in your last page, I was particularly impressed with the word cohesive. I mean, it's incredibly important as we look forward with this. And we don't have a disjointed series of recommendations that relate clearly to one another.
I would agree with that. If we shouldn't be generating a separate set of recommendations. We should be looking at the recommendations that are being considered and help support what do we need to know. There's lots of perspectives on that commission that can say, that can generate questions, that can say, from my organization's perspective, here's what you need to make sure, or here's the data that you need to look at. Yes, cohesion is really important.
Representative Higley.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering what your public engagement looks like to date. Again, I think that's critical, and with the group that you have on the commission, I think it's important as ever to make sure the public does reach out.
Absolutely. So public engagement so far, thank you. I actually probably should have highlighted this. The law requires this commission to rotate to physically meet in every county in Vermont. And so we have met in Washington County, Orange County, Addison County, what am I missing?
Franklin.
Franklin, thank you. Those were our September through November meetings. I believe tentatively we'll be in the Northeast Kingdom. We haven't confirmed yet. In February, and we'll continue to rotate. Starting with our October meeting, maybe our September meeting, every time we rotated, we also held an evening engagement event at that location. We've been very graciously hosted by school districts around the state and that's probably where we'll continue to be. We know that engagement sessions that happen from 5 to 7 aren't accessible to everyone. We have had a hybrid option at each one of those, and they've been great sessions. But we want the expertise of a consultant to say who's not showing up at those meetings and how do you get those voices. There's also a significant number of named either organizations or entities in the law that we need to decide how to engage with, and we want our consultants to help with. So we have done that. All of our meetings are open and public. We've had pretty robust public comment. There is a fair amount of engagement in the work, which is great. And we want to refine it and get better.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have 2 related questions.
Great,
if possible. So first of all, thank you for your work. It's an incredibly hard and complex task. And it strikes me that one constructive role that the commission could play is vetting data and findings to ensure that whatever we do here is based on a solid foundation. And I know that the report included some findings that were updated and revised several times because of concerns around quality. So I guess my first question is, what opportunities did the commission have to actually validate the data that were included in the report? And what assurances were provided by the AOE to the commission that the analyses that were inserted into the report are now correct? So for example, the special education spending numbers appear to be different than spending information that's reported elsewhere, including data that reported to the federal government.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. The commission, and I don't have it at my fingertips. I'd be happy to forward it to the chairs. I'll back up to early in the process, I would say August-ish is when the commission and the finance committee generated data requests. Here's the information we would need. There was a decision point, and not a permanent decision point, but there was a decision at that point to say, at this moment, we believe the agency has that data and they are the best suited to produce it for us. And so therefore the commission didn't seek additional consultation at that time. They did leave it open that if we believe we need more data analysis as a commission, that we would seek that. The commission does have the ability to contract, that's why we have a communication consultant. So generated a list of data requests, and again, with a parallel process, the Agency of Education was also engaged in data collection, data analysis, and frankly, pushing out a large number of data that they have not in the past. And there was a significant amount of questions about that data, and those questions were collected. I would say the agency was pretty responsive to the questions that were raised between the first report and the second report. Those questions didn't all generate from the commission, some of them did. From the Education Finance Subcommittee, from the commission itself. What I don't have in front of me but could provide is the agency gave a pretty lengthy summary of here's all the data we were asked to get, here's all the questions and concerns that were raised about that data, here's what we've done with it, and here are the revisions. I just don't have it in front of me, but I can follow up. So that's what we've done so far to be able to look at the data. And I would say that that second report came out at the end of November. And I don't know that in terms of agenda time, the commission, which was focused on turning the report around, I would say we have not done a second round, or at least members have not brought okay, now I've done a deep dive into the second draft, here are my additional questions. They haven't had that conversation yet.
Okay, so to try to understand, I think what you're saying is the commission did not vet the data that was included in the findings?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think that the commission was presented the additional revised report, looked at that data, did not raise significant concerns that changed their set of recommendations. I would say though, that they did not, so you get to a point where we turned our attention to articulating the complexity and giving a status update of an individual policy. If they wanted, in order to then say, there's a recommendation, or it's not a recommendation, it's a policy consideration, idea A. Here's the data we have about idea A, is that sufficient or not? They have not yet come to that level. But I would not say that the data wasn't vetted.
Okay, well, by the commission, that brings me to my second question, which is really how did the commission go about vetting the inferences and conclusions that were presented by the secretary in her revisions to your report over the last weekend? And does that commission continue to stand by those? And the reason I ask, for example, is that the report concludes that district level spending has increased in recent years due to the influx of federal funding. However, there's no information provided in the report or in the subsequent AOE analyses to substantiate that point. And further, when the data are appropriately adjusted for inflation, it looks like district spending in real dollars is essentially unchanged. And similarly, the commission's report asserts that special education funding has increased due to additional federal revenues. I live in the world of supplant and supplement, and this conclusion is particularly concerning because if the data are accurate, it suggests that federal dollars somehow may have supplanted state and federal spending on special education, which would violate the state's and district's requirements for maintenance of effort and maintenance of financial support, and as a result could put the state's $224 million in federal special education funding at risk. So again, I'm asking you, are those inferences, are you confident in the inferences that were made and presented? And should we be worried about whether the state is in violation of federal requirements related to maintenance of financial support? No.
I would say the commission does, and I also would say the commission is not unanimous. I believe it was an 8-3 vote to support the finding of the preliminary report. But the majority of the commission does support the high level summaries of those data points. And I would say in relation to the second part, I don't know that I am speaking a little bit in my role as someone who had administered special education for a long time. I do not believe you can draw the conclusion from that data that school districts are vastly in violation of non-supplant or maintenance of effort requirements.
I don't think anyone said that, I just.
Well, I think that's a little bit what you said in your question.
I asked a question, if we should be
And so
concerned.
what I'm
Let's
saying
take
is
turns with our
that,
talk.
no, I'll back up. I would affirm the commission does support the high-level findings. And remember, those high-level findings are Vermont schools spend more money than much of the rest of the state. We have fewer students, we operate a lot of schools, we have a lot of staff. That's what I mean when I say the commission validates high-level findings. My understanding, although I have not seen it, is that the agency is providing additional detail about special education, and that report is coming out soon. The commission hasn't had a chance to vet that. But I do not, just speaking as a special ed administrator, I do not believe Vermont is in large-scale violation of maintenance of effort requirements. That's not my understanding, but I'm not speaking as the commission chair about that second part.
And we'll have opportunities as a committee to look through both Agency of Education data and JFO data as we make our decisions throughout the session.
Great. There's some further questions out there. Representative Brady?
I don't know how much you can answer this yet, but I really appreciate the framing around, where we were when we created the commission, and a lot that has happened since, and much of it out of your control in terms of changes in the agency, a very different level of engagement from the agency. So now here we are in this reality, and as you look to the future of the commission and you pointed to it, could you share at all thoughts about what kind of resources or what kind of schedule, like what would, if we take where we are now, knowing we've got the agency far more engaged, they did a listen and learn tour, we've got the legislature very engaged, we've got lots of joint committees meeting immediately in the first 2 weeks. What roughly some of your thoughts might be about resources for the commission, or how to really validate and take advantage of this expertise and the work that's been done already and continue it and not lose this great resource.
So it is the right question. I would say it's the question that the commission itself is asking itself. We have made a decision in the at least immediate future. The commission meets once a month, and then the second alternating Monday of the month is held for committee meetings. We've decided to meet both twice a month as a full commission and sort of temporarily suspend the committee structure so that we can more deeply engage. And our first task, frankly, is to take a look through every single policy ask of us in the law and prioritize. And I think to your point, I think the challenge is we exist and have made a determination to meet more frequently and lift up a mechanism that would allow us to help react to the ideas being presented. Originally, our charge is generative to create the policy recommendations. It may be that we need to pivot to reacting to the policy ideas being considered and figure out the best way to be even more than 2 times a month as a full commission. What's the engagement we should have with the legislature? I'm not sure that's necessarily a resource. I would say that there's 13 of us, and we are, and I don't mean this, we aren't compensated, right? We're not there and carved out time, so we can't dedicate the amount of data analysis. I think, one of the things I would just offer is, because I hear it as the chair, there's concern about whether or not the commission is just taking the agency's information. And I think that the commission is taking the information available to it, looking at it with a critical eye. And I think if, in some ways, the legislature needs to direct us about what our role is, and should we continue to, it would be helpful for us to say, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn because the term student funding formula has been raised. the idea of structure has been raised, but that's about the detail level. And the commission could help be part of that conversation and help say, well, what would you need to look at? There's a whole lot of detail underneath that we don't have and wouldn't be able to react to. So I think that the commission could be a body that spends more time saying, okay, legislature is talking about X. Here are the things that you need to know about X. Here's the information you need to have. I don't know that we're the entity to create the data. I don't know that we're the entity to analyze it, but we are all people who could say, when you are looking at this, make sure you have this information, make sure you're engaged with these people or these groups. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Representative Bergen.
Megan, I have a question about how the commission is coming to a definition of high quality. A lot of the discussion that I've watched commission meetings has been about cost and governance and equity, and that high quality education kind of gets slipped in there, but it's a little unclear that there is a working definition across Vermont of what that is.
Yeah.
How are you working to get to that definition alongside all the policy recommendations about governance and cost structure and those kinds of things?
Yep, it's a great question. So there is a working definition of quality in Vermont, it's the education quality standards, right? That's in rule. And in Vermont, there's a lot of autonomy in how you implement education quality standards. So even something that's in rule, there's a lot of variability and historically, not a lot of accountability toward the education quality standards. So as a commission, we had that conversation when we were developing our guiding principles and said, what do we mean by quality? And at the time, said the two places Vermont defines quality is in the education quality standards and frankly in independent school rules, because independent schools do serve some of our student body. And the decision was quality right now is defined for public schools as the education quality standards. That's as far as we got during this part of the conversation. And then you're right, the commission turned its attention to the delivery of this report. What I would say is that technically our first charge is to create a vision for Vermont's education. That is one of the laundry lists that the commission will come back to and say, have we adequately defined that? I don't know that the 13 people on that commission should be the writers of that vision, but we may need to be the ones to say, here's how you would create that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, I believe the agency is creating that too. And that's what I mean by cohesion. And the commission does not want to work at cross purposes. We want to try to inform and be a body that can react to and inform that conversation. It's kind of a circuitous, potentially not answer to your question.
I just want to offer, and I said this to you privately, but for everyone, what I think would be incredibly useful as we go along is, I know that many members of the commission might not have expertise in data analysis, but I think you all have deep expertise in the work that you do on a day-to-day basis and sort of the seat that you sit in the larger system of education in Vermont. And so the more we can bring ideas to you and for you all to be saying, these are the implications that I see of these ideas. These are the questions that I would have about what would come next about these policy proposals. I think that will really help us go much deeper and understand both unintended and other positive consequences of some of the work we might be taking on. And that being able to do that with sort of a unified group who I think has a lot of respect and has built a significant amount of trust under your leadership would really go a long way in us being able to do our work well.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. The three questions that that I hope that the group will look at each one of those consideration areas is, what information do we need to know about this thing before we make recommendations about it? Who else needs to be engaged in the conversation, and what are the implications? So I'm affirming what you're saying, Emily, and that's helpful. And I think there are other more specific things that the legislature would want us to think about. And that's just on what's already named in Act 183. So the other thing the legislature could do is hone our attention a little bit further if you so desire. We are gonna do that as a commission. We're not gonna pause completely. We are gonna, create our own understanding of what are the things we should be looking at now, what should we look at later. So we are gonna move forward, and we are certainly open and in fact would welcome. This was really important at the time that we wrote it in, and right now it's less important, and instead we want you to do X. The commission wants to make this a better process. We don't want to be something that gets in the way. We also frankly, and this is why that affirm is really important, we don't want to be ridiculed as a commission. I think it's difficult, and I think there is the perspective, and that's a hard one to be when you're the one sitting there. I'm probably saying something that you all experience as legislators. So maybe that's not fair of me to say that, but I think that's important because if the legislature has decided that that is not a structure that is important to your work, then you should make that decision and tell us that. Because otherwise we're spending a lot of people's time and commitment, and it's 13 people who care very much about the work, and they will find other ways to participate in the process if they need to.
Representative Brady.
Okay, I want to follow up just for a minute on what you just said, having sat in the House Ed when we first sort of envisioned this and talked really, some of the best conversations I've been involved in was who should be on it. So it's, it's the 13 people, but it's perspectives that, House Education at least listened to over 120 some witnesses last year, really trying to understand the whole kitchen sink of like, where do we go from here? And thoughtfully consider what are the perspectives that we need and that don't exist in the legislature, that don't necessarily exist in AOE. And so those, whether not necessarily those individuals, but those perspectives and what they represent, were considered very carefully. So I hope that we don't lose sight of that. I wonder, President Booker asked about quality, and I think I just need to correct my own thinking. When we say, in this context, when we're talking about delivery, we're really just talking about sort of where kids are educated and what size the class, but we're not really talking about the how, like the sort of changing pedagogy and 21st century learning and what are we preparing students for. Like, it's just dawning on me that that really isn't necessarily the charge here of the commission at all. And I think that would take us in another whole direction. But I do wonder sometimes if the public perception is this is about like the future of public education. They're thinking more about like the experience a student has than some of this more systemic pieces of it.
I don't disagree. The one thing I would add to that is that Vermont has very progressive definitions of education.
Yeah.
Act 77 and proficiency-based learning, frankly, the education quality standards, particularly the updates to it from Act 1, are very progressive. They are the visionary education. What we have that's different in Vermont is a different way of implementing this really lofty vision. We have a very locally driven implementation system that creates variability. So it's an interesting question to me about defining the vision. We have some and the educators in the room probably feel like pretty exciting and good for kids vision. But we also have, and having been a superintendent, I have experienced sitting with a board and community members and saying, here's how we deliver our education to achieve that vision. And we are staffing ourselves in alignment with education quality standards. And an ability of a community to say, that's okay, we can do more than that. We can have more staff. And I would like you to have more staff in this area. That happens in Vermont. That's different from other places. And that's related to who holds us ultimately accountable for implementing the quality standards is not a simple answer. Yes, we would receive feedback from the agency if we were in violation of them, but that's what makes this complicated. So I think, I think Vermont has a vision for education. We sat in a community input session where several community members very articulately said, I moved here from insert a state outside of Vermont. And the fact that we are sitting here and the word equity is on the board and doesn't mean we are living it, we know we're not, but we're working towards it. And they lifted that up as a really important thing to preserve. One of the questions we asked in these general sessions is, what do you want to keep about Vermont education? So I actually think we have some pretty progressive visions. It's whether or not we are organized to be able to deliver on them in a way that is sustainable.
I'd like to validate what you said a moment ago before Representative Brady's question about the fact that we did create this commission in our vision, in statute. It passed, and we are, I think, on some level responsible for you all getting the respect and validation that you need in the work that you do and continuing to make sure that you are of use and not just, screaming into a void. So I just sort of want to make that public commitment to continuing this conversation and continuing to look to the commission as we do our work and to not further divide this really important conversation we're having in the state into too many pathways for anyone to even know where they're going. So I just want to thank you for your work on that.
Anybody else?
Representative Holcomb?
Thank you.
I thank you too, and I just want to point out the difference in support you're getting than, for example, the 167 sustainability planning, which had quite a bit of money and quite a bit of staffing and quite a bit of data capabilities and engines behind it. And so I would just urge us all to have extraordinary caution, and that's not your fault. It's the reality of where we are.
And for you to ask for the resources that you need to get the job done.
Yes. Well, I think the first step, the next step, because it's not the first step we've done some work, but the next step really is to say, what are we spending our time on? It'll be easier to answer the question of what exactly do we need for support when we know exactly what we're. And as I said, we will move forward as a commission, and we will welcome some funneling. If the legislature chooses to do that, we would be receptive to it. And then we would be able to say, because you're right, we are not resourced for writing a report and saying, things like that. We do that. We do the work. So, thank you.
Just to follow up on that comment, actually, you do most of the work. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks again. Just curious, is the commission charged with looking at specific proposals from the legislature or whomever? I'm talking maybe specifically about removing the free lunch program, how that would be affected, how it would happen, PCB testings, things like that, again, and remediation costs that schools are having to pick up. The $6 billion worth of construction costs that came out in a report. Any of those sorts of things, something the commission will grapple with?
So there are absolutely things the commission wants to engage with. They're not named there are actually some policy areas named in the law. One of them is change in funding formula that we are asked specifically to look at. That level of specificity, no, but we are asked to look at the uses of the education fund. And that's some of what you shared are related to that question. So really the answer is yes, but no, you won't read Act 183 and see those particular issues raised. But each one of those has been talked about in the commission as one of the things that makes it really complicated. Those are some of those cost drivers that aren't really within, I just talked a lot about local decision making. Those are actually not really up to local decision.
Okay.
And I would add that there's that laundry list of sorts that Megan described is hyperlinked in her presentation, and that includes both of those topics that you named explicitly on that list as topics to go into deeper.
Yes, Representative Kimball.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan, for coming. I guess I'm concerned in one sense that the expectation of our constituents is that they want more immediate relief and action, and this is a slow, deliberative process. You want thoughtful consideration about what the structure looks like. And so there's pressure on us as legislators to deliver something quickly, so that we'll meet every day with that in mind. The administration's working at it every day, and then you've got a part-time commission that doesn't have the resources that we've got. So it's finding that balance. So I'm just concerned about whether we're going to replicate all of our work. You've mentioned it, you've talked about it, and we just have to find that right space. It's hard.
Yeah, I think you articulated it well, and that's what I mean by if there is a desire to refine, the commission will refine its work. And we believe, we're not coming to you saying we don't think we should exist. We are coming to you saying we think we are suited to provide really important implication impact, and that will be impossible to do well if the laundry list is too long. And so maybe yeah. I don't have a good answer for it. We're acknowledging that it is one of the things that we need to figure out.
Just a logistical question. If that were to occur and things were to get refined, would that take legislative action to modify the charge of the committee?
Probably a good question for legislative council. And one we should ask soon, since the process of actually modifying it is challenging.
And I think in the short term, you have a fairly broad charge that a lot of things could fit into.
Yeah, correct.
We could start with some things and not start with other things.
Right.
Right, like there's ways to organize our work in response to what would be helpful to you all.
Yeah, and I would like to just follow up and say thank you for all the work. It's important. I definitely see a benefit to continue to have this commission as we move forward into figuring this whole situation out. Thank you.
Great, well, we will wrap there. We are an hour ahead of schedule. I would ask our committee to remain here, and probably we haven't really had a chance to sit and talk among ourselves, and we'll just take advantage of the fact that we got a little bit of time to do that.
And we're gonna be upstairs in Ways and Means at 10:25, which is in 20 minutes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.